Hey, good morning. I'm Vicki. I'm an authentic leadership and business coach. And I am coming to you today from Oaxaca City to talk about slowing down and feeling guilty about taking downtime. Something I've noticed a lot over the holidays with a lot of the clients that I work with. But before we dive into that, if you don't know me and you have not crossed paths with me before, and this is the first time, I went through a career transition 5.5 years ago. I left corporate America because I was feeling burned out. I was feeling not aligned with my job anymore. And I was really seeking a work that allowed me to work in my zone of strength and do it on a more flexible basis. And that led to me living a travel lifestyle where today I spend a lot of time in Mexico throughout the year, and then also a lot of time back in my home state of Nebraska. So today I'm coming to you from Oaxaca City, Mexico, where I'm at for 2 weeks. And over the holidays, I noticed a theme of people feeling a little bit guilty for taking time off. And so I wanted to talk to you about that today. I think there's a couple factors that influence this feeling of guilt around taking time off. One is guilt itself and what I call legitimate guilt versus illegitimate guilt. And the other is the state of our culture today and the expectations that have been placed upon us that maybe aren't so reasonable. So let's start with that one first. Because I've gotten the ability to step in and out of two very different cultures that live at two very different paces, I have seen this more emphasized in my time of being in Mexico and then going back to the US, where it feels like for me when I'm in Mexico and life is moving at just a slower pace, a less hurried pace. People are still getting a lot of things done, but they're not rushing around everywhere to do it. They're not feeling so stressed about doing it. And then literally like the minute I land in an airport in the US, it's like landing in a rushing river where no matter how much you intentionally want to slow down, you're almost caught up in that tide. And I see that a lot for people in the workplace today, especially with their load of work, where maybe the company they work with has gone through some consolidations or some acquisitions or some restructuring, and people have been eliminated, and job tasks has just continually been stacked on top of people. So the people that are there have continued to absorb more work. So they're feeling very, very stretched thin. And what happens a lot of time in those situations is instead of thinking like, wow, that's maybe a little unfair of the company to continue stacking things on and expecting us to have the same level of output in the same number of hours, people begin to judge themselves for not being able to get things done. And then they begin working longer and longer hours. And that steals from their health, their happiness, their families. And it also becomes and feels somewhat of an expectation. So they're now living life at this somewhat unreasonable expectation and judging themselves for not being able to, make that work. So that's one side of it. And then let's go back to this guilt piece. So I think there's, again, in our culture has given us a lot of messages around productivity and money determine our value. So many people today are measuring their value by what they produce. And when they're resting, they're technically not producing anything visible. And so there's this inner sense of judgment or criticism and guilt that arises. That's what I call illegitimate guilt, because in one context, we all know that we have to slow down and rest to rebuild energy for the next season. I often use the example of a marathon runner during client sessions, where we wouldn't begrudge someone who's ran a marathon to take some hours to rest, maybe even a day, maybe even a week to rest, before they moved back into their training system. Yet we judge ourselves for feeling like we need downtime. It was one of my major goals in the career transition, was to live my life at a lot slower pace and to not be putting so much pressure on myself to rush from thing to thing. And it's wonderful. It brings a little quality of ease and joy into life that's not there when we're rushing from thing to thing to thing. So illegitimate guilt is when we're feeling guilty about having rest time and downtime just because our brain is telling us that we're not being productive. The flip side of that is legitimate guilt. And legitimate guilt says, I've done something wrong and now I need to be accountable for that. That's our conscious giving us that message. And so if you're someone who has found a way to be completely lazy at your job and get by with not doing much of anything, and then you're taking time off and you're feeling a little guilt, well, maybe that would be when more legitimate guilt comes into play. Okay, so what I want you to understand today is that we have to slow down. We have to give ourselves permission to rest. We have to readjust our expectations. And when that little gremlin of guilt pops up, we have to question it, whether it's legitimate or not. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with you today, and I hope that you have a great day. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of a view of Oaxaca City here as we end out today.